The energy crisis rages on. Just this morning, it was reported that 4 more UK energy suppliers have collapsed due to the high prices. In yesterday's video, we talked briefly about the price of WTI oil, which has been on an absolute tear this year, and it's these sorts of energy costs that are of course contributing to inflation, which is another big talking point this week, with major central banks announcing monetary policy tightening to tackle rising prices. And those central banks have pretty much overshadowed another big event taking place this week between oil-producing nations with the OPEC meeting on Thursday. Quite ironic actually, considering the other big event right now is all about climate change. But what can we expect from the OPEC meeting this week? Will they increase their production supply to help ease prices and cater to growing demand? Let's find out in today's Market Movers Daily. Hey, I'm Nicholas, welcome to the video. So the OPEC meeting is happening on Thursday and they're going to be deciding whether they stick with their planned supply increase of 400,000 barrels per day, which is what they agreed back in July, or whether they'll increase it even more. There's a delicate balance right now between supply and demand, and that's not even to mention all of the political aspects of all of this. So as always, as you can imagine, there's a bit of a debate going on right now. So let's start with the demand side. Just this week, BP have stated that global oil demand has bounced back to over 100 million barrels per day, and their CFO announced that they expect demand to be above pre-pandemic levels already by next year. So this means, to a certain extent, OPEC have managed to achieve what they set out to do. They wanted to be behind the demand curve rather than risking jumping ahead of it and getting caught out if there were any issues with the recovery from the pandemic. And this is how things still seem to be right now. OPEC is still cautious about pumping too much oil in case there are setbacks with COVID. However, many world leaders, including President Biden, have been calling for supply to be increased even more. In fact, just on Saturday, Biden encouraged G20 energy producing countries with spare capacity to boost production that will allow for a stronger recovery. He's also been trying to pressure OPEC into increasing production as well. And it's no wonder he's calling for more supply when you look at the current level of consumption. The last time it was at this level, US shale companies were producing at near capacity and OPEC were not holding back much production capacity in reserve. Whereas now, according to Goldman Sachs, the global supply deficit sits at around 2.5 million barrels per day, US output is about 1.7 million below pre-pandemic levels, and OPEC is bringing back supply at a rate below the rising level of demand. In fact, some OPEC countries didn't even manage to ramp up production to the quotas allowed in October. OPEC actually increased production by 190,000 barrels per day rather than the planned 254 barrels per day rise. China's inventories have also hit a 4-year low, which adds to the other energy shortage issues that they have. They did release some of their reserves of oil, but that didn't really seem to solve their problem and has just depleted their inventories even more. They don't publicly disclose the size of their inventories, of course, but there are countries that use things like satellite tools to estimate the supply levels. So what are OPEC likely to do about this situation? Well, the likelihood is that during this meeting, they won't do anything except confirm their existing agreement. Saudi Arabia, which is obviously one of the biggest and most influential oil producers, has rejected the idea of ramping up supply more than what was planned, as they say the oil market is already well supplied. Kuwait also supports the current plan to increase supply by 400,000 barrels per day. They feel that that provides an adequate supply to balance the market. And likewise, Iraq has made similar comments, suggesting the current plan is sufficient to stabilize the market and meet demand. So it seems at this point, the OPEC members that are making comments seem to be in agreement, and we're unlikely to see an increase beyond what's already been planned. Although, to be honest, you never actually know for sure with OPEC, and I wouldn't completely rule out a surprise increase. On the other hand, Iran is currently in talks about its nuclear program, and if a deal can be done, it would mean that US sanctions could be removed and supply from Iran could come back to the market, although that's not something that's likely to happen immediately. There are also companies that are increasing supply thanks to the current high prices, like BP, who I mentioned earlier. They've announced this week that they're going to increase their investment in US shale oil and gas to $1.5 billion in 2022, which is a 50% increase from its $1 billion this year. So, taking a look at oil prices, as I mentioned yesterday, the technical signs were that the price was struggling to break the recent high. The bullish trend had weakened, and we were beginning to see the signs of short-term bearish structure starting to take over. However, on second looks, I saw that maybe it's just in a sideways market, a bit of a holding pattern until after the OPEC meeting, because I think the market's probably just being cautious right now while waiting to see what OPEC are going to do. And I think unless there's a real surprise in the OPEC meeting and they do increase supply more than expected, we could still see oil prices edging their way up, since it seems that supply will still be behind the demand curve. However, I'll be keeping an eye on where there may be short opportunities in the future just after that, since at some point I think they're going to have to give in, except that things aren't going to, there aren't going to be any major setbacks with the pandemic, and therefore they can increase supply even more. Or demand will begin to top out, leading to less rapid escalation in prices. But let me know what you think. Will you be trading oil around the OPEC meeting? And do you expect them to keep the production increases as planned, or do you think they're going to add even more? What do you see happening with the oil price in the near future? And are you trading any other energy companies or energy prices? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you're not sure what OPEC is, if you've got this far, I'd be surprised about that. But if you don't know what it is or why it exists, then we have an explainer video coming out in the next few days that will cover all of that for you. But if you liked this Market Movers Daily and you found it interesting or helpful, please hit the thumbs up button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so I can see you again tomorrow. Take care.